Well, good evening, P Street family, and whoever else might be joining us tonight. For those of you that have been sort of keeping up with these Sunday night Bible classes, you know that last week we finished our series of lessons, our class on holy habits. So we've got this last Sunday night in October before we start, of course, a new month in November next Sunday night. So what I'm going to do is, I guess, another installment of the series on haunted. And if you're kind of visiting with us or joining us here and not a part of the church family, on Sunday mornings, I've done a series on haunted. We looked at regrets and haunted by doubts and haunted by hurts and haunted by worries. And I'm going to add another one to the mix there tonight. And if you're interested in some of those others, you can check them out on our YouTube channel. And you can even find them somewhere down the page on our Plastic Street Facebook page. And let me say this about next week. I've just about decided that the series that we'll do for the month of November on Sunday nights, I hope it doesn't go beyond that. I want to try to keep it compact. I'm gonna call the series Postcards from Heaven. And so if you want to know which books of the Bible we will be studying, look at those books of the Bible that last for all of one chapter, okay? So there's one in the Old Testament, and I think there's 4 in the New. So you might take a look at those, and that's going to be our task in our Sunday night Bible class starting in November. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about tonight. I mentioned this to the folks this morning. Haunted by grief. And, are you haunted by grief? Are you in the midst of grief? Are you struggling to shake your grief? Here is some quotes that I think will ring true for those of you that have gone through a season of grief in your life. So it's true. When all is said and done, grief is the price we pay for love. I believe this is Buchanan in the book Brushstrokes of a Gadfly. But that's true, isn't it? Yeah, to love someone deeply and to care for someone deeply is not just to risk pain and grief. I guess it is to risk it. They may outlive you, right? But you live long enough, you're going to deal with grief because of the folks that you love in your life and you care for in your life. So it's true. When all said and done, grief is the price we pay for love. And then here's one from J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. You care so much that you feel as though you will bleed to death from the pain of it. Some of you that have grieved, are grieving, that might resonate with you. You feel so deeply for someone. Obviously hurting so bad by that loss, by that void, by that separation. Feel like you might bleed to death. And then here's some words from Psalm 6. David writes, I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. So grief is a profound difficulty that we as humans are subject to, and it's important that we not necessarily look at grief as an enemy. It's God's way, or God's sort of, I guess, prescribed avenue for healing from a profound loss. Here is, I wanted to share this with you. I've always found this to be kind of interesting. This is a stress scale, and this is where somebody somewhere kind of rates those things that cause us the most significant stress and difficulty and pain. And you'll notice that the ones I have highlighted, the thing about a stress scale is it can be kind of relative. There are some people who, because they were never married, never had children, but they had maybe in their life a very close platonic friend who they shared a lot of memories with, who was with them through thick and thin. That loss could be as profound. So understand, there is something relative about a stress scale. Someone might put these things a little differently. Some of you are like, they got Christmas at 12. Now, I'm definitely putting that at 55, But you'll notice that up towards the top, most people would consider the death of someone close to them, very close to them, to be highly significant, highly stressful, and very painful. Here is it's what I like to call the nitty-gritties of grief. Just some basic information. Grief, definitional. Grief is a normal personal response to the loss of any significant person, object, or opportunity. Generally, and at least for the purpose of this lesson, we're going to think of it in terms of losing someone, not something, okay? But grief, notice, is normal. It's not abnormal. It's certainly not outlandish. It's normal. Grief is a process. It's not an event. And it usually lasts for 1 or 2 years. That's important to know. I mean, there are times where you're in the throes of grief and you would like for the pain to go away immediately. Wouldn't it be something if your grieving process lasted all of a night, and you woke up and, after you fell asleep at some point, and the pain was gone. You somehow had reconciled everything, and you had, seemingly healed of all of that. But that just is not how grief works. Okay, it's going to take time. And then here's one other thing. Grief is accompanied by a host of physical and psychological manifestations, and it might be helpful for me to just kind of wrap some of these off right quick. So among physical manifestations of grief, and I'm sharing this so that, those of you that have grieved or are grieving, you're able to go, okay, yeah, that's me. That's where I'm at. I'm dealing with that. That resonates with me. I know I'm not going crazy. I know that what I'm dealing with is normal. So some of the physical manifestations of grief: loss of appetite, changes in weight, trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. By the way, this grief process, this could be, we could add in here the element not just of death, but divorce. A lot of folks that go through divorce go through these manifestations, and there's a lot of overlap between the two kinds of losses. There's fatigue, there's chest pain, headache, palpitations, hair loss, gastrointestinal distress that goes along with grief. And then some of the psychological manifestations, these are helpful because I've heard of cases of people, for instance, dealing with hallucinations, like audio-visual kinds of things, where they feel like they sense the person, or that they saw the person, or they heard the person. That's common. I mean, that happens. It's not necessarily abnormal. There's sadness, anxiety, helplessness, emotional swings, irritability. There's apathy, where you're just numb. There's disbelief. There's impaired concentration, lowered self-esteem, searching for the deceased, flashbacks. And individuals may progress and then suddenly feel worse without an obvious trigger. So there's a lot of physical and psychological stuff that folks are dealing with when grief descends upon them. Here are some types of grief. Let me make this big for just a second. In fact, I will go to this view so you can keep these in front of you. I just want to provide you, just go down the line here and provide you with just sort of some basic definitions of these. And the two that we're going to focus on are anticipatory and normal, okay? Some of these others, if you go, man, that's me, or I know somebody that's going through that right there, then they may need to talk with somebody. I'd be willing to talk to whoever about any of these things. But anticipatory grief occurs before the death of a loved one. The death of a loved one is impending. You've gotten the diagnosis and you've gotten the prognosis, and you can see that this person is declining and that it's time for them to transition from this life to the next. And or you sometimes it may not be just real imminent, but you know that as things go, other than God's grace in that moment and an answer to prayer, that this person is just going to go down and down, and you begin to prepare and you begin to process that. That's kind of what anticipatory grief is, and we're going to look at some stages of that, but we'll have a caveat. Normal grief includes expected and common expressions of sorrow over a period of time, ultimately resulting in a return to a measure of productivity and stability. Complicated grief mimics normal grief, but appears with greater intensity and longer duration, and can be attributed to a variety of factors. And this is where it's tough to really, all right, are you dealing with something that's normal here? Because grief's normal. Or has this moved beyond normal to abnormal, to a more complicated situation? Delayed grief occurs when a person does not initially show any of the expected symptoms of grief. That somehow they've managed to kind of put the grieving process on hiatus, and that can be a cause for concern. But then sometimes people are grieving pretty viciously, but they do a good job of hiding it from you. You can sometimes come across those cases. Disenfranchised grief occurs when someone does not have a socially acceptable outlet for mourning or loss. And those situations can vary. But you could have a situation where, maybe somebody, it's a strong patriarch or matriarch, somebody that has sort of a skewed view of grief and that tries to prevent it, or tells people that it's wrong to grieve, or questions people's faith if they grieve. You can get into some interesting and extremely complex situations if that's afoot. Traumatic grief occurs when death is unforeseen and sudden, with no preparation or anticipation time. Traumatic grief. And, this is the car wreck you didn't see coming. Okay, this is the knock on the door from the police officers to let you know that this loved one, is deceased as a result of X. Or this could be a diagnosis out of the blue, and then the person's gone before you can even, process the diagnosis. So, sudden heart attack. It's traumatic. Now, calamitous grief is like traumatic in that it's unforeseen. But calamitous grief is when the death occurs in a self-degrading fashion. Okay? Sometimes the suicides are associated with this, or the circumstances of the person's death are embarrassing, are in and of itself just difficult to accept, because maybe they were engaging in something they shouldn't have been engaging in. some behavior or something of that, and that can really intensify the grieving process. Let's look at some stages of anticipatory grief. Okay, the lady that is often associated with this is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. It's important to note that this is anticipatory grief. There's a lot of folks that when they cite the stages of grief, they leave out the word anticipatory, and give the impression there is overlap between this and normal grief. But this is in the context of you preparing for someone's passing, okay? Denial, it's not unusual to respond to the intense and often sudden feelings of impending loss by pretending the loss or change isn't happening. Denying it gives you time to more gradually absorb the news and begin to process. It's kind of a defense mechanism. Anger. Okay, you get anger at, why me? That life's not fair. You might look to blame others for the cause of your grief. You might redirect it towards those that are closest to you, family. You might find it incomprehensible if you are a person that is strong in faith. You might start to question God. Where are you? Why didn't you protect this? Why is this happening? This is not what we wanted. We had these plans, and how could you do this? How could you allow this? It's important. It's important not to suppress anger. It's important to express anger. It's important to feel it and to vent it, because if you suppress it, things don't go as well. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to lament. There are things to watch out for, but anger in the face of someone you love, passing from this life makes sense. Bargaining. You feel vulnerable. You feel helpless, and in those moments of intense, emotions, it's not uncommon to look for ways to regain control or to want to feel like you can affect the outcome of the event. So there's a lot of what if, there's a lot of if onlys. Again, if you're a person of faith, this is where folks will try to make a deal with God, and kind of like a bargain with God. God, I promise that I will stop doing this, or I promise I will start doing this if you will let my spouse live, if you will let my child live, if you will let my mama, my dad, whatever. That, if I do this, Lord, I'm going to do this. I promise you. So how about let's make a little deal here. Let's make a bargain. Bargaining is a line of defense. It is. You kind of manufacture some hope there in a sense. I feel like if I do this and show that I'm good for this, then I think God's gonna, He's gonna come through, and He's gonna answer our prayers, and sometimes that is the case. The person makes a turn for the better or something of that nature, but there is still this reality on this planet. We know this, that death entered the world a long time ago, and it's not going anywhere. It's not until Jesus comes back. We're all going to have to deal with this. We're going to lose people, and we're going to be lost. If He doesn't come back, we're going to be lost in the sense that we will perish. We will die. I know that's morbid, but sometimes we fight against the inevitable, and that can cause us some trouble. Depression, that shouldn't shock us when we realize bargaining's not making much of a difference. Two types of depression will often kind of settle in here. There's depression based on the fact that, of what used to be will not be again. Okay, that gets in there. And then there's the other sort of face of depression, and that's over things that never will be. This person is passing away before they get to see the grandkids graduate, or marriages, or births, depending on the timing and circumstances. And so that's tough. And then there's acceptance, okay? There's acceptance that can be reached at some point, even prior to a person. It doesn't mean there's no grieving left to do, okay? Because you still got to deal with the stark reality that this individual's gone. Acceptance is not a happy time or a sad time. It just is, okay? It's just a point you come to where you realize, okay, I have to let go. They're going, you know. They're gonna make this transition from this life to the next. Normal grief stages of this. All right, so. And believe me, I've got a couple of slides coming up I think many of you grievers out there are going to appreciate. But let me just mention these very quickly. Shock and disbelief. This may last for a few seconds. And it can go up to 6 weeks. Again, depending on circumstance, marked by numbness, marked by disbelief, often alienation from others. The loss may be intellectualized and dealt with on sort of a rational level, as opposed to the feeling level. This is where, a lot of folks will be at the funeral, okay? And again, how the normal grief plays out, it depends on whether or not the person had much time to deal with anticipatory grief, okay? And so sometimes you'll find people at the funeral who have come to terms with that loss, and because they saw it coming and they had a chance to process some things. And maybe they came to a place where they go, they were hurting so bad, they were suffering so bad that it's actually a relief. And that's okay, okay? You go, man, it was a relief. It was a release for them. And I find some comfort that they're not in pain anymore. Awareness. This is where you get more of the feelings level here, more of the pain in the heart. This is where, sort of the adrenaline that's released in response to the stress of our loved one's death, that's starting, those chemicals are beginning to decrease. Also, the support of friends and family might start to lessen, after the funeral, to greater or lesser extent. And the impact of the person being gone is starting to be fully realized. The onset can be at about 2 to 4 weeks, go up to about 3 or 4 months. Depression is going to take you through, 6 months or so. Then there's, of course, reconciliation and recovery. These are sort of your final stage. And this is where you have to weather the first of everything, like the person's birthday, the holidays, the date of the loved one's death, these anniversaries, we might say. And you have to kind of navigate those, and that's a part of the grieving process. Here is what, let me get my mug off there here. So here's kind of what they tell us, okay? Shock and awareness, depression. Here's kind of the things you can do or you need to be doing in order to deal with your grief in a healthy way. So this is what we're told. Okay, it looks all nice and neat and segmented, and it's like some of you that would like to plan your grief. You're like, all right, I got the stages in front of me, and I'm going to try to follow this map. Here's the reality. See? Look at this. Jumping back and forth. This is just to show you that even though there are apparently some discernible stages or emotions or hurdles you got to jump over, it isn't just as cut and dry as maybe we would want it to be, but this is what we deal with. This is what we go through. So as we move from sort of the ins and outs of grief, I think it's helpful to see those stages because you can kind of go, okay, get some definitions and things so that you can kind of be like, all right, I'm normal. What I'm going through has been seen in other people, hence they're able to discuss it in this way, counselors and psychologists and all of that. And so what I want to do is I want to transition from that to just some basic, practical kind of advice for getting through grief, okay? The first is to accept the grieving process, which we've kind of been outlining and talking about. Don't try to go, I say this at a lot of funerals and in prayers sometimes, don't try to go over this or under this or around this as if you can circumvent it and get away from it. The best thing you can do is accept the grieving process and go through it, okay? Express what needs to be expressed. You got to go through it. Don't try to delay it. Don't try to, so many people, because of the pain, they make some bad decisions. They try to temper that pain with drinking or pills, or they cut themselves off socially to such an extent that it's a detriment to them. There are definitely some pitfalls you got to be looking out for. So accept the grieving process. Second thing that's important to see is grieving your own way. This is not to say that no similarities exist between two grievers. It's just to say that some differences can exist. It's vitally important that we do not judge or condemn somebody that's not grieving the same way we do. Some people grieve overtly and publicly. Some cultures, they grieve in ways, they wail. I think about in like at the death of Lazarus, or just funerals in the first century context. They would actually hire professional mourners to be there and to weep and to wail and to express overtly the pain of loss that to some extent, would help other grievers to give vent to what's going on inside of them. That was true at Lazarus' funeral and others as well. So just don't condemn or judge it. Some people are gonna, like we said, are gonna try to almost hide it, or they're gonna grieve privately as opposed to publicly. Some people separate themselves from their responsibilities. Some people dive head first into their responsibilities. And there probably needs to be some balance between the two, if possible. And we might add here that a person may not necessarily grieve the deaths of different people in the same way. David, he had to deal with the death of Jonathan, a close friend of his. He had to deal with the death of an infant born to Bathsheba. He had to deal with the death of Absalom, his own son that rose up against him and tried to take the kingdom from him in a coup, mutiny. And there's evidence that he didn't grieve all three of them the same way. By the way, the Bible knows grief. The Bible's not silent about grief. The Bible's very real about grief, which, for me, undergirds its trustworthiness. The fact that, hey, the Bible's real and true to human experience. Here's the third thing. Don't grieve without God. Don't grieve without God. So let me give you a couple of passages here. Psalm 31:9. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and body also. It is so important in the throes of grief to keep a death grip. And I realize we're talking about death, but you understand what I'm saying, that you want to hold on as tight as you can to your faith in God, to look to Him, to lean on Him. Certainly lean on the promises that He's made to you. Passage I really love is 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our afflictions, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. There's a lot of comfort going around there. And I did a funeral one time for, I don't know, I wouldn't say it was an atheist. It was very open-minded. And you really couldn't, nail him down as to what, if he had any sort of structured belief system. And, those are tough. Those are tough funerals to do. For the family, I often use 2 Corinthians in cases where we have maybe a lack of confidence about this individual's future beyond the grave. You don't want to get into this game of being judge and jury and executioner and all. You don't want to do that. That's not. But 2 Corinthians, I remind them God is the God of all comfort, all of it. Not just some of it, but all of it. And that they can, with God and in time, get through grief, whatever that grief might be and whatever that grief might entail. And then there's one other thing I like to kind of point out to people. Grieve, or don't grieve, I should say. Don't grieve without hope. And this obviously is true if we're dealing with the death of a child of God, someone who loved God, someone who was obedient to God, who we have a great confidence that this individual is in fact in Abraham's bosom, to use the language of Luke 17, that this person is in paradise. Some passages along these lines, 1 Thessalonians 4:13-14, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. Here is Paul writing to grieving Christians about their lost loved ones who apparently were also Christians. And he is saying, hey, you don't have to grieve as those who have no hope. You have a hope because Jesus rose from the dead. He's bringing a long train of believers with him in time who are going to emerge from their tombs. They're going to rise, in the context, we're going to rise in the air to be with the Lord forever. And so he seeks to comfort them with these words. And that's obviously what I'm trying to do here as well, to grieve with hope. Another passage you have to love, Revelation 21:3-4. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. That promise there has buoyed a lot of grievers, because they're able to think, okay, there's a day coming when that tear of grief is going to be wiped away forever, where loss and pain and separation, death, is no more, where people don't mourn, where people don't grieve. That's heaven. That is besides the presence of God, the dwelling place of God, besides being in God's presence, that perfect, painless environment is something we long for, and something that is an anchor for us when we are in the midst of grief. So that is, there's a lot we could say about grief. If grief is right now has descended upon you, I hope that that some of the things we've discussed have given you hope, certainly have reminded you, okay, I'm not going crazy. Okay, I am normal. This is normal. What I'm dealing with this is what we do. It's kind of, again, it's God's means of getting us through grief. But if you feel like your grief is complicated, that it's gone longer than it should, that it's proven to be more debilitating than you could have ever imagined, and you need a listening ear, hey, give me a call. Get in touch with us here at the church. Let me know, and we'll do what we can to help you. Okay? I hope all of those who are able to be with us for the Haunted series. I've gotten a lot of good feedback. In some ways, you're dealing with felt needs, or you're dealing with things that just everybody at some point in time deals with. So it's a series that really resonates with people. So I hope it's been a blessing to you, and I hope that you have a really, really, really good week. I don't have my slide. Thanks for watching the slide. So I'm just going to end by saying, thanks for watching.